Hey guys, I'm so excited. John McLaren and I are talking today about how to not get burned buying your next investment property. So, John, we're going to give them 3 tips. Give them tip number 1.
So I think one of the kind of hard and fast rules that a lot of investors use is what we call in the industry the 1% rule. And I think that's a really good benchmark to make sure that you're paying the right amount for your property and that the amount that you purchase it for and the amount it's going to rent for line up, right? So explaining what the 1% rule is, it's basically that you got to buy the property. Let's say you buy a property for $100,000 and you think it's going to need $10,000 of repairs. Okay, so you're all in on that property for $110,000. 1% of that is $1,100. So that's the amount that you need to feel very confident it will generate in monthly rent. That's the basic formula for the 1% rule when buying what we call a buy and hold investment property, meaning you're going to buy it, you're going to hold on to it for a lengthy period of time, and you're going to rent it out to the people, and that's your investment strategy.
Yeah, and I'll give you another example. If you're going higher, so if an investor is looking to have a mortgage loan on a rental property, their mortgage payment, their payoff value, let's say, is $200,000. If they're using the 1% rule, you're going to say that you want to make sure, can you rent the property for $2,000 a month in that rental payment? And so because the $200,000 multiplied by 1% is $2,000. So in this case, the investor wants to make sure the monthly payment is no more than $2,000.
And I think a lot of people make the mistake of not building in the repairs. They buy a property that is a little bit run down and they think, okay, it's a $100,000 property and I know I can rent it for $1,000 a month, but they haven't factored in that it's going to take, $20,000, $30,000 to get it to rentable condition. So you got to add that renovation budget to the initial purchase price. And then you really need a rent of, $1,200, $1,300 if you're invested $120,000, $130,000 into the property. And this can be kind of difficult to do. I mean, I don't think that properties out there, it's just a dime a dozen that find properties that match this criteria. So when you found one that it's probably a good buy, because they are rather difficult to find. It's easier to find in the lower end of the price spectrum and much harder to find in the higher end of the price spectrum. So this is a good hard and fast rule. Probably somebody who wants to buy a 100-unit multifamily that's going to be relatively low income probably wants a little better than this 1% rule. And somebody who wants to buy a property that's going to have a grade A tenant, like a $500,000 single family house, and going to rent it to like a NATO tenant who's going to be really secure and fantastic, they're probably expecting a little worse than the 1% rule. But a general rule of thumb, that 1%, handles most properties really well.
And I will say I have one exception to the 1% rule for me personally. And the only one that I've made is I had a property, the last house that I lived in, I purchased for $430,000. And I didn't sell it. I decided to rent it out. Right. And I only make, I think, $2,650 per month on that property. So
that's a good example of a little bit more expensive one.
Yeah. So for that one, technically, right, if I bought it for $430,000, I should be making $4,300 a month in rent. And so the only exception I make on that is that in this particular case, that property I own is paid off. So I own nothing on it. I've lived in that house. It's not like I'm purchasing it. It's just a house that I lived in and bought something else.
Right.
So,
and yeah, I think that people, they shouldn't stress too much if they bought a house for themselves and they've lived in it for a while and then they're converting it to a rental. If it doesn't quite meet those numbers, then your analysis becomes a little bit more of, how do I shake out on a monthly basis? My mortgage payment with my escrows, and then you got to build in a little cushion for escrow or for vacancies and repairs and that sort of thing. Am I positive on a monthly basis is kind of the thing to do if you're moving out of your own home and going to rent it, as opposed to just I'm out there seeking a new investment property that I'm never going to live in. Those can be two different things.
Yeah, so let's talk about, that's one of the other things. So let's pretend, let's give tip number 2 is to add in the cost of repairs for the monthly cost of them. So, for example, I have a friend of mine who I think he has 200 rental properties that he owns currently. Like, he's a beast.
Yeah, that's a big portfolio. Yeah.
I think it's 200. I can't remember, but I remember it's an astronomical amount.
Right.
And he's told me that he's evaluated it, and he said it's $150 per month on townhouses and $250 on single family homes per month. Can you explain that a little bit more, John?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a person, let's just use your example, a person who bought a $400,000 house and they're moving out of it and they're going to want to turn it into a rental property. They may make the mistake of saying, okay, well, I pay $1,700 a month in rent or in mortgage, and I think I can get a tenant for $1,700 a month. And they failed to do just what you mentioned, is account for what are going to be repairs that come up that you're not expecting, right? So if you call $250 a month, maybe call that $3,000 a year, that you need to be prepared for, right? So if you pay $1,700 in mortgage and you collect $1,700 in rent, well, guess what? The $3,000 in repairs is coming out of your pocket every year, right? So I think that's very wise. And I think you also have to account for a little bit of vacancy, right? Like maybe every 2 years that property is going to turn over, and it's going to take you a couple weeks to spruce it up and a couple more weeks to find a tenant. So over the cycle of a few year period, you need to build in 1 or 2 months of no income on it. So I think building in the vacancy and building in the repairs, even though they don't happen every month on a regular basis, they are going to happen.
Yeah, and that's what he's saying. Exactly. It's also the vacancy. And I think he might say 300 if you're adding in the vacancy as well. Because if you think about it, if you might not have repairs for 10 months. You might have nothing break. Then all of a sudden you have to pay $3,000 for a hot water heater. 3,000 divided by 12, there's your $250.
Right.
And things just happen. They just do. The microwave breaks, this breaks, and so forth. Okay, now let's talk about tip number 3, which is overestimating the cost of repairs of what you think it's going to take. Talk about that for just a second.
All right. So back to my analogy of you're buying a $100,000 investment property, and you've gone over there and hopefully you've done an inspection. Hopefully you've got, a good agent who's given you good advice and representation, but you've done an inspection. So hopefully you have a pretty good idea of what it's going to cost. But let's say you think it needs a new roof. You think that you're going to have to redo one of the bathrooms that's a mess. You're going to have to do all new flooring and new paint. And maybe you're just spitballing in your head that all that's going to cost you $20,000. It's wise to pad that a little bit, right? To say, okay, I think it's going to be 20, but why don't I build a little miscellaneous budget? You never know, right? You start to tear out the bathroom.
I say pad 20%. So that means if you think that it's going to be 20,000, at least pay on 24,000 or 25,000, 20 to 25% minimum of extra padding. And I will tell you, I've done several, I don't know how, I know you've done a bunch too, but I would say almost always, and I feel like have gotten really good at this, of figuring it out. And something always brings some extra things in it. It's almost always 20 to 25% more than what I initially thought. What about for you?
And you've got a lot of experience in this, and I know you're actively looking for them now. I've also been a landlord for about 13, 14 years now. I have, 3 rental properties, and so I've done this many times as well. And I agree with your assessment completely. Pad that at least 20 to 25%. And I think that's wise if you're flipping houses as well.
Yes.
I mean, anytime that you're going into a renovation, you're going to end up tearing the shingles off the roof and realize, oh my gosh, all the deck boards are rotten. And now that cost has just gone up $1,000 from what I expected. And there's always unexpected things in that renovation.
Always. And my opinion is I would pad it more like 40 to 50% if it's your first time. Like I feel like if you've done it for a while, you might be more in the 15 to 20% range.
Right.
If this is your very first one, you need to pad it even more because you haven't added in the other things that maybe a seasoned person needs to add in.
I agree with that completely. Yeah, the less experienced you are, build more padding in there, and I think that will keep you safe on your very first venture.
Awesome. Well, John, tell people any other tips that you can think of, any last minute tips on not what to watch out for.
Well, I don't think you can go wrong with not following the 1% rule if you go a little more expensive, right? So my rental portfolio doesn't meet the 1%, just as you said yours didn't for the house that you moved out of, but they're all $400,000+ homes. So I knew that it wasn't going to meet the 1%. So I think if you're getting into, in Hampton Roads at least, if you're getting into a property with a rental range somewhere between $700 to $1,100 a month, you need to mentally prepare yourself and financially prepare yourself for the fact that those tenants are going to be a little bit more difficult, right? You're going to have increased chance that they don't pay you sometimes. You're going to have increased chance that they damage your home or at least leave it very unclean and that sort of thing. So the lower end of the price spectrum, you need to build more and more padding. Now, typically, the lower end of the price spectrum, it performs at 1% or a little better than 1%, and that reflects the risk that you're taking. Because I do think that, you have a higher risk. The lower the rent is, the higher the risk is.
I'm so glad you said that. And so my husband, he is really kind of Nazi about the 1% rule. And so the advice for me, he's like, you should know this. Like, why are you not doing this? He's like, you need to take that for his advice to me, which is sound advice, which I'm not listening to,
Sure.
but there's a reason. That $400,000 house, what he's saying is you should sell it and buy 4 $100,000 houses. And then you would be making $4,000 a month instead of $2,650, which that logic makes sense. But my argument to him is, look, I already own it. I don't have to then sell it and then buy 4 more properties. Number 3, I have tenants that have been in there. The guy before was in there for 4 years. The guy now has been in there for 3 years. You could lick the floors. These guys, they're NATO guys. They email me all the time about how I'm the best landlord they've ever had. They're so nice. Like, you know what I'm saying? I don't have to even think about it. I don't even hear a word boo out of these people. I'm like, I'll take my $2,650 and call it a day.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very idealistic idea that you're going to actually collect that $4,000 a month seamlessly, right? You are going to collect $4,000 a month sometimes, and then you're going to have one of those people that doesn't pay probably every other month, and you're going to have more headaches involved in it. And I have the exact same strategy as you. I have one house that's valued right now at probably $525. I collect $3,200 a month in rent. It's a NATO tenant who signed a 5-year deal. They keep the house absolutely perfect. He said there's only like 12 people from Denmark in Hampton Roads right now. And he said that my house has become like the get-together party house. It's got a pool, it's big, it's really nice. And so he said with 99% certainty, his replacement will take my house also, right? So when I signed that deal at $3,100 a month, that's, at a 5-year deal, it was a $180-something thousand contract that I signed at once. And yes, I could get a better return on lower houses, but it would be riskier, and how it shakes out over the 10 to 15-year period, I'm not sure it's a better return.
Exactly.
It looks like a better return on paper month 1. But in the long term, I think at least if you're diversifying your portfolio, have some in both categories.
Absolutely. Well, John, you are amazing. You are so smart, so wise. You are a blessing to us. Tell listeners where they can find you and where they can learn more about you.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So you can go follow me on Facebook, John McLaren, spelled just like the race car. And my email address is jmac, as I'm affectionately known within the company, jmac@chantelray.com. My phone number is 757-235-1199. Call or text anytime. I love to work with investors, first-time home buyers, really anybody in Hampton Roads that needs my help. I'm there for you.
You're awesome. All right. And if you guys want, feel free to make a comment below and we can answer any other questions that you have. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye, Chantel. Thanks.
Captioned by Simpronto.